top Confederate general was General Robert E. Lee. And Lee commanded the Army of Northern Virginia, the Confederacy's main army, defending the Confederate capital here in Richmond. But with the war now a year and a half in, the Confederacy was starting to have trouble with manpower, with industrial capacity. They didn't have the factories to make the stuff for a long war that the North had. So Lee thought that the key to victory was to win quickly. And he thought that the Confederacy could do that by invading the North and winning a significant victory in the North, like somewhere in Pennsylvania. So, Lee's army moved up from Richmond, which you can see on the map here, and up to Antietam, where they were eventually confronted by the Union Army. And they fought near Antietam Creek, near the town of Sharpsburg, in western Maryland. September 17th. This Battle of Antietam, also known as the Battle of Sharpsburg, was the bloodiest day of warfare ever in the history of the country. And that was true when it happened in 1862. It's still true today in 2024. The United States has never had a bloodier day of warfare than this fighting, most of it at the edge of a cornfield in western Maryland. I'm not going to give you many details about the battle, but here's just one. In one afternoon at Antietam, more Americans died than in all of the American Revolution. The casualties were immense. Now, when the battle concluded, Lee turned his army around and went back down into Virginia. The battle was really like a bloody tie, but remember, Lee had been looking for a dramatic victory, and he didn't get it. The casualties were all over western Maryland. Field hospitals set up in Hagerstown, Frederick, Boonesboro. It was devastating. The landscape devastated by the invasion. The North was getting a little desperate. And on January 1st, 1863, Lincoln announced the Emancipation Proclamation. He declared the slaves of rebels free. He did not free the slaves. Here's a map to help make sure you understand the difference. Remember, the Confederacy stretched from Virginia over to Texas. By January 1st, 1863, the Union had taken control of these areas you see shaded in blue. So along the coast, here, around New Orleans, and then pushing down the Mississippi River, the Union now controlled most of Arkansas, upper Mississippi, most of Tennessee. So, in all those areas, the proclamation did not apply. The proclamation also did not apply in the loyal states, including Maryland. So the proclamation only declared free slaves held in rebellious areas, which meant nobody was freed on January 1st, 1863. But the proclamation did shift the purpose of the war. So the war was now about freeing slaves too. Not all of them, but it was about freeing slaves. Not Maryland's, but the slaves in the rebellious areas. The proclamation also committed the Union to letting black men fight. The Army created a segregated division within the Army, known as the United States Colored Troops, USCT, United States Colored Troops. The Union was willing now to let black men join the Army and fight in a campaign to free slaves. That's what 2 years of bloodshed had done, shifted their agenda. Now, in Maryland, supposedly enlistment was supposed to be limited to free black Marylanders. And remember, there were plenty of those. But there was at least one general in Baltimore who took slaves into the Army from jails, from slave trade pens. Ultimately, close to 9,000 black Marylanders served in the USCT. Remember, 60,000 Marylanders served in total, so about 15% of that is black Marylanders in the USCT. This is an enlistment roll from the Eastern Shore, Queen Anne County, Talbot County, Dorchester County, Kent County. Colored troops were paid less than their white counterparts. This was a sign that even though the Union now was willing to take their help, they didn't accept their equality. It was a sign that the war was moving towards ending slavery, but not moving towards racial equality. This is one of the few pictures of USCT from Maryland that I could find. Not certain that all these guys are Marylanders, but this is the 4th Regiment of USCT Company E, which was organized in Baltimore in 1863. This photograph is from them on duty down in South Carolina in 1864. Free black Marylanders grumbled about the unequal pay, but many of them were eager to have the chance to fire a musket ball or plunge a bayonet into the heart of a slaveholder. And they would do that even for less pay. While the enlistment of USCT continued across the state and across the country, important little side note, in March 1863, Congress belatedly authorized Lincoln to suspend habeas corpus. It sort of gave a backdated legitimacy to what Lincoln had been doing for almost 2 years. But now, Congress gave its approval, and that pleased Roger Taney. Taney died the next year. 2 years after Taney's death, the full Supreme Court ruled that Taney was right and that the president could not suspend habeas corpus without Congress. But by then, the war was over. In the 1863 Maryland elections. The state still under military occupation, and close to 25,000 Marylanders were disfranchised. These were Marylanders who supported the Confederacy or were construed as having supported the Confederacy. They were 25,000 of the most pro-slavery, to your modern sensibilities, like the worst guys in Maryland. And now, the military occupation had pushed those guys out of the right to vote. So without them, the state called a constitutional convention to debate, among other things, ending slavery in the state of Maryland. The Constitutional Convention met in Annapolis in April 1864. With a huge chunk of the population ineligible to vote for delegates to the convention, the convention had a much higher proportion of people who were pro-union and anti-slavery. And so, they voted to create a referendum that the people would vote on for whether or not to end slavery in the state. So it passes at the convention, and now the people are going to vote on whether or not to give their approval. In a crafty bit of dubious constitutional maneuvering. Check this out. So those who are allowed to vote, vote. And this is for ending slavery, and this is against ending slavery. And you can see for ending it, 27,500. Against ending it, 29,500. So we failed. By just about 2,000 votes, the voters of Maryland voted against ending slavery. But here comes that dubious bit of constitutional maneuvering. The Constitutional Convention said that Maryland's soldiers could absentee vote on the Constitution. So it was not legal to vote unless you were in the state of Maryland. But they now ruled that the soldiers could vote on whether or not soldiers would be allowed to vote. Well, guess what? The soldiers were for it. The absentee vote of the soldiers was overwhelmingly for the amendment to end slavery. So, check it out. Here's the yes vote from the people, the no vote from the people. Add the soldier no vote. Soldiers voted 90% to end slavery. And so the soldiers' vote put it over the top by 375 votes. An incredibly thin margin, delivered by the men who went to risk their lives serving Maryland, fighting for the Union. Slavery in Maryland was ended. Emancipation Day was November 1st, 1864. Now, you can notice just in the swift way I went through this that this would not have been possible in Maryland's conventional political system. But they had done it. The people who had always wanted to end it seized the opportunity when the disloyal pro-slavery people were pushed out of political power. And they got it done. Now, incredibly, Maryland became a destination to go for freedom. Now enslaved people fled from Virginia to Maryland, not trying to get on to Pennsylvania any longer, but freedom in Maryland. On the battlefield, the Confederacy's top general, Robert E. Lee, surrendered on April 9th, 1865. I have not given you a clear sense of how the Civil War battles unfolded, but this has already been way too long. So just understand that the Confederacy had fought hard, but run out of able-bodied men. The enslaved population of the South had undermined the Confederacy from within. After Lee's surrender, Lincoln gave a speech in D.C. calling for black men who fought for the Union to have the right to vote. Lincoln was assassinated soon after that speech. The hunt for his assassins focused a lot on Maryland. We don't have time for that story. But we do want to be sure to conclude with the 13th Amendment, which was passed by Congress in January 1865 and then ratified by the states by December of 1865. The 13th Amendment would end slavery nationwide as Americans had come to know it. As you can see here, slavery shall not exist except as punishment for a crime. No, check the loopholes. Check the loopholes. But being forced to work after being convicted of a crime is not the same thing as what slavery has been throughout this history that we've seen so far. So the 13th Amendment ended slavery nationwide, but Maryland could say that they had beaten the country by more than a full year. That's it. That's all I have for you.